Hi everyone, this is Brandon, and today is the first video in our video series covering the SAT reading section. So today, to give you a brief overview, I'll just be going over some important things you need to know about the SAT reading section as a test taker. I'll go over some technicalities, I'll go over the main question types you'll see on the test and how to solve them, and we'll round it out by doing an analysis of a literature passage on a past test. So to begin, about the SAT reading section. The reading section is the first and arguably the most important section on the SAT. Because while doing well on the reading section gives you momentum and it gives you confidence going into the rest of your test, doing poorly on the reading section will hinder your performance on the rest of the test because you're more likely to feel less confident in your answers and you're more likely to feel less confident in your abilities in general. So some technical aspects about the section. The reading test is comprised of 5 passages and 53 questions, and the time limit on the section is 65 minutes. And if you do the math, this equals to about 13 minutes that you have to do each passage on the test. The common archetypes of the passages include the literature passage, the history passage, and the science passages. And in addition to these passages, each exam will usually, or not usually, but it'll always have one double passage, which is a passage that includes 2 different texts from different writers. And these texts really are aimed to test the test taker's ability to really compare and contrast between passages, as well as their ability to cross-reference between texts. And usually these passages are the science passages or they're the history passages. So now I'll be going over some main question types you'll encounter while you're taking the reading test, as well as how to approach them and how to make sure you're doing them correctly. So the first type of question you'll see is the main idea / primary purpose type of question. And these questions are usually worded as so. They're like, what is the main idea of the passage? Or what is the author's primary purpose in writing this passage? So obviously to answer these types of questions, like comprehending the information that's given in the passage and understanding the main ideas is very important. But aside from that, you really need to consider all the parts that each answer choice presents. So for example, if there's an option that talks about the primary purpose of the passage, and one answer choice says the purpose of the passage is to evaluate the research that led to a scientific discovery, you should really be able to point to where the passage, 1, evaluates research, and also 2, where it talks about a certain scientific discovery. The second type of question you'll see on the reading section is the shift in narrator attitude. And this usually appears, in my experience, on the literature passage. And it really asks the test taker to evaluate change over time in certain characters in a piece of literature. So the way that I find most effective in answering this question is by finding a specific point in the passage where the attitude of the narrator or the tone of the passage or whatever shifts. And the good part about finding this point in which the attitude of the narrator or whatever the question is asking for shifts is that you'll be able to go in front of this point as well as behind this point. And by doing that, you're able to analyze the change over time. The third question type is regarding sentences in a passage. And these commonly come up as this sentence mainly serves to, or the purpose of this sentence is to. So some important questions to ask yourself when you see these questions are, out of all the things the author could have written to, explain a certain point, why did they choose to write it like this? You need to make sure to consider the bigger picture of the passage when you're answering these questions. Does the sentence maybe provide supporting evidence for the argument the author is making? Does it maybe undermine the opposition's argument? if you were to remove this sentence in question from the passage, what information would be missing from the passage? The next type of question I would like to talk about is recall questions. So recall questions are probably one of the more simpler questions because they simply just ask you to recall a piece of information that you should remember from reading the text. So if you don't remember the specifics, of course, always refer back to the passage before choosing an answer. And with these types of simple recall questions, you should be able to, point out a specific sentence or specific few sentences in the passage that really give solid evidence for the answer that you're choosing. The next type of question is the vocabulary questions. And a really easy way to do this is to plug in each of the answer choices into the passage and really consider how each of these words work in context of the sentence. Other than, plugging it in, a good way, or the best way, I should say, to practice vocabulary is just by reading more of the types of passages that the SAT might test you on. For example, literature passages and history passages. So you can expect a list of recommended literature that we'll be posting in the next couple of days on the Google Classroom to help you guys boost your vocab skills. And other than that, there's a ton of SAT vocab lists on Quizlet and stuff like that that you guys can also use to study vocab. The next type of question I want to talk about is the best evidence questions. Basically, these questions ask you to provide evidence for a previous answer choice of yours. So naturally, what you want to be doing is to build off the answer that you've chosen for your previous question. And for each of the answer choices, you want to refer back to the text and you want to really consider how relevant and how supportive each of the answer choices is to your previous answer. And the last main type of question that I would like to comment on is graph analysis questions. These are more rare and they usually appear in the science section of the test. But they're also sometimes tricky because it is easy to make dumb mistakes on these. So all I have to say about these is to pay attention to the axis labels and also to make sure that you're extracting the correct information from the data that's being given. So for example, if the question is asking you how many dogs were at the park and you look at the graph, you want to make sure that you're 100% finding how many dogs were at the park. A lot of the times people will be going too fast on these easy graph questions and they'll accidentally circle an answer that is how many cats were at the park or something like that. So in this way, just make sure you're being diligent in answering these types of questions so you don't end up making stupid mistakes. So now that we've kind of covered all of the main types of questions on the SAT reading section and how you should best prepare for them and best study for them, now I'll be going over a literature passage and I'll be analyzing it for you guys. And hopefully you can learn something from my analysis so that you can hopefully, improve your own analysis and your own reading comprehension skills for future practice tests and ultimately for the real SAT. So let's take a look at this reading passage right here. This is, I believe, from the SAT's 4th official practice test. And yeah, so the first thing I would like to point out is you always want to be reading the opening blurb at the beginning of the passage, no matter if it's literature, history, or whatever, because oftentimes they can give you a lot of information that might help you better understand what's in the rest of the passage. So let's begin. This passage is adapted from MacDonald Harris, The Balloonist, 2011, by the estate of Donald Heine. During the summer of 1897, the narrator of this story, a fictional Swedish scientist, so we know this character is not real because this is, after all, a piece of literature, has set out for the North Pole in a hydrogen-powered balloon. Okay, that's interesting. All right, the passage begins. My emotions are complicated and not readily verifiable. So we can already tell there's this type of inner tension that the narrator is feeling. Maybe it's because he's nervous about his upcoming journey, or maybe there's something that is troubling him that we need to read more on to find out. I feel a vast yearning that is simultaneously a pleasure and a pain. So here the narrator is basically admitting that while his desire to go on this journey and to explore is a sense of pleasure to him, it is also a pain. I am certain of the consummation of this yearning, but I don't know yet what form it will take, since I do not understand quite what it is that the yearning desires. This is kind of a complex sentence because there's a lot of like repetition of yearning, and then there's sort of like this complex sentence structure. But basically what the narrator is saying here is that he knows, he is certain like that he wants to do this, but he is not entirely sure of what is the end result of him doing this certain action. For the first time, there is borne in upon me the full truth of what I myself said to the doctor only an hour ago, that my motives in this undertaking are not entirely clear. So here again, we see that sort of inner conflict that we noted early on in the passage. While he knows, the balloonist knows that he has to maybe make this journey, he's not like, the reasons why he has to make this journey are not entirely clear to him as of this moment. For years, for a lifetime, the machinery of my destiny has worked in secret to prepare for this moment. Its clockwork has moved exactly toward this time and place and no other. So here he's saying that like his destiny, his fate is like a machine, and it has been, sort of edging him on towards this moment. For those of you who are just finished 10th grade, I know that you guys read Oedipus, and this is like kind of a theme that also appears in that book, the theme of, fate and also free will. So basically the narrator here is saying that his fate is kind of pushing him towards this expedition to the North Pole. Rising slowly from the earth that bore me and gave me sustenance, I am carried helplessly toward an uninhabited and hostile, or at best indifferent part of the earth, littered with the bones of explorers and the wrecks of ships, frozen supply caches, messages scrawled with chilled fingers, and hidden in cairns that no eye will ever see. So this sort of provides kind of a reason for the narrator's internal conflict, being that he feels like his destiny, his fate is pushing him towards such a hostile, uninhabited place that no one would really dare to go explore. And yet he feels like he's obligated to go to such a place. Nobody has succeeded in this thing, and many have died. Yet in freely willing this enterprise, in choosing this moment and no other, when the south wind will carry me exactly northward at a velocity of 8 knots, I've converted the machinery of my fate into the servant of my will. So here, in this sentence, we're kind of seeing a change in the narrator, because he is saying that he has converted the machinery of fate into the servant of my will. So what the narrator is basically saying in this sentence is that he is no longer being controlled by his fate, his destiny, by that hand that's pushing him and willing him to go to the North Pole and explore, but rather it is now his own will. So now, instead of just, succumbing to his fate and playing out his fate, he is now using his own will to choose and to go on this expedition. All this I understand, as I understand each detail of the technique by which this is carried out. What I don't understand is why I am so intent on going to this particular place. So now he realizes why, he realizes that he himself wants to go, but he is unsure of why. Who wants the North Pole? What good is it? Can you eat it? Will it carry you from Gothenburg to Malmo like a railway? The Danish ministers have declared from their pulpits that participation in polar expeditions is beneficial to the soul's eternal well-being, or so I read in a newspaper. It isn't clear how this doctrine is to be interpreted, except that the pole is something difficult or impossible to attain, which must nevertheless be sought for. Because man is condemned to seek out and know everything, whether or not the knowledge gives him pleasure. In short, it is the same unthinking lust for knowledge that drove our first parents out of the garden. So basically, here, the narrator is proposing a possible explanation for why he feels the will and the need to go explore the North Pole. And this reason is the fact that humankind is destined to kind of seek out and to explore and to know everything that is unknown. And suppose you were to find it, in spite of all, this wonderful place that everybody is so anxious to stand on. What would you find? Exactly nothing. A point precisely identical to all the others in a completely featureless wasteland, stretching around it for hundreds of miles. It is an abstraction, a mathematical fiction. No one but a Swedish madman could take the slightest interest in it. Here I am. The wind is still from the south, bearing us steadily northward at the speed of a trotting dog. Behind us, perhaps forever, lie the cities of men, with their teacups and their brass bedsteads. I am going forth of my own volition to join the ghosts of Bering and poor Franklin, of frozen De Long and his men. What I am on the brink of knowing, I now see, is not an ephemeral mathematical spot, but myself. The doctor was right, even though I dislike him. Fundamentally, I am a dangerous madman, and what I do is both a challenge to my egotism and a surrender to it. So here, the author, not the author, but the narrator rather, is kind of coming to terms with himself, his desires, and his sort of will to go to the Arctic, to go to the North Pole and to explore. So here he says that he confirms rather that he is going forth on his own volition to explore and to do something that is crazy, but also something that he finds fulfilling. So now that we've finished analyzing the passage, an important thing to do is to really zoom out and to look at the bigger picture and to maybe summarize for yourself what you read throughout the passage. So in summary, at the beginning, we can see that the narrator is really conflicted as to this upcoming expedition. And towards the middle of the passage, he realizes, or he converts, the fate that has been pushing him towards this expedition for so long into his own will. So he is now in the middle of the passage, not being forced to do this by his destiny and by his fate, but he is doing it out of his own will. And after he comes to that conclusion, he talks about some of the challenges, some of the reasons why people might not go to the North Pole because it is such like a desolate and uninviting place. But towards the end, he again confirms that he is the person, he himself really wants to do this, and that he is the one that stands to gain something out of this experience by really pushing forward out of his own will to go explore the Arctic. So yeah, now we have finished the analysis of the passage, and you guys, as practice, as extra practice, I have included the practice questions that go along with this passage. So what I want you guys to do is to practice some of the question answering skills that I talked about earlier and apply them to answering these practice questions. So yeah, hopefully my tips helped today. Hopefully my analysis helped. And I wish you guys good luck in your preparation this week. All right. Thank you guys.